Before we dive into this thrilling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest uploads. Your support keeps us going. Now, let's get into it. I hadn't even finished cutting into my steak when my mother cleared her throat and said, "We've made some changes to the trust. You're no longer a beneficiary." She said it as casually as someone announcing a change in dinner plans, not the financial betrayal of a lifetime. The silence at the table was deafening. My knife paused mid-cut, glinting under the soft glow of the antique chandelier that hung like a relic over the dinner table. Everyone else kept eating, my father methodically slicing his roast chicken, my brother Julian sipping his wine with a smugness that dripped off his lips, and my sister Eliza checking her phone with perfectly manicured fingers. They had rehearsed this moment. I had walked right into their performance, unarmed and unprepared. It had been 5 years since I last visited this house in Bellevue, and even longer since I voluntarily sat down for a family dinner. The house looked the same. Vaulted ceilings, gallery wall of family portraits I was barely in, expensive furniture they never paid for, but the atmosphere was different. Too curated. Like walking onto a set, not a home. When my mother called me last week, her voice sugar-coated and soft, I almost didn't answer. "Isabelle," she said, drawing out the syllables. "We haven't seen you in so long. Come home. Let's have dinner. Just us, as a family." Just us. As a family. The irony choked me now. I took a deep breath, carefully placing my fork down beside my plate, then folded my napkin with the precision of a neurosurgeon. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Can you repeat that?" My mother's smile didn't waver. "We've updated the trust. You're no longer listed as a beneficiary. It wasn't an easy decision, sweetheart." My father didn't look up. He rarely did. His job had always been to keep quiet unless my mother needed backup. Eliza looked up from her phone long enough to flash me a half-smile and then returned to whatever influencer was yelling at her through the screen. Julian leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes dancing with satisfaction. "It's nothing personal," he said, voice slick as an oil spill. "You're doing well. You've got a career, money, stability. Eliza and we need that foundation more." I felt the air leave my lungs. For the past 12 years, I had been the foundation. The uncredited, unthanked, and fully operational financial system that kept this family afloat. When the stock market crashed, I refinanced the house. When Dad's construction business went under, I absorbed the debt. When Julian got expelled from Columbia for the 3rd time, I paid for his transfer to a private university on the East Coast. When Eliza had her influencer burnout, in 2018, I funded her healing sabbatical in Bali for 8 months. I had the receipts. Literally. Still, I forced a smile. "So you've decided I don't need anything from the trust. Is that it?" Julian nodded. "Exactly. You've always been independent. You're a CFO now, right? You earn more than any of us combined." My mother reached for her wine. "This isn't about love, Isabelle. We love you. It's about what's practical. What's fair." Fair. A laugh escaped me. I didn't mean for it to come out, but it slipped, sharp, short, and acidic. "Fair?" I echoed. "You think this is fair?" My father finally looked up, his gaze vacant. "It's not personal. It's precisely personal," I snapped, my voice rising just a notch, still trying to hold the tension below the boiling point. "You've decided that because I've survived, because I earned everything you refused to give me, that I'm no longer entitled to anything? I'm not family now. Just your silent benefactor?" My mother's lips tightened. "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The word landed on me like an insult, the same way it had when I was 15 and found out she sold the piano I saved for because Julian needed a gaming laptop for school. The same way it had when I found out they used my name to refinance the house when my credit was pristine and theirs was ruined. Dramatic. Always too sensitive. Always too much. I stood up slowly. The napkin fell off my lap, fluttering to the floor like a white flag of surrender, except I wasn't surrendering. "I see. Well, thank you for dinner." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You're leaving already? Am I supposed to stay?" I asked. "Should I toast to your betrayal? Maybe give Eliza a cash envelope as a parting gift?" Eliza rolled her eyes. "God, you're so bitter." "It's not that deep." I turned toward her. "You've never worked a real job in your life. You've burned through 5 influencer contracts, 3 of which I negotiated for you. You live in an apartment I pay for. You drive a car I bought. You wear designer clothes that were purchased with my Amex. And now you're going to inherit part of the lake house I renovated?" She blinked. "No one asked you to do that." And there it was. The sentence that stripped away every ounce of restraint I had left. I laughed, and this time it was loud. Ugly. Real. No one asked me? I said. Do you really believe that? My mother stood. Enough. This is exactly why we waited until now to tell you. We knew you'd react like this. You mean, honestly? No, Isabelle, she said, her voice icy. We mean selfishly. I stepped back, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in. I looked around the room, the chandeliers, the paintings, the hardwood floors I had paid to replace, and felt a bitter burn crawl up my throat. You're calling me selfish? My father stood too. You're upset. That's understandable. But you're not being rational. I turned to him. You let this happen. You always let it happen. You sat there while they made me their financial slave, and now you're sitting there again while they erase me from the family like I never existed. No one's erasing you, my mother said, stepping forward. We just made a decision. Yeah, I said. And now so will I. I grabbed my coat, ignoring the stunned silence behind me. As I walked toward the door, Julian called after me. What, you're gonna cut us off? Because you didn't get your little piece of the pie? I turned slowly. No, Julian. I'm going to audit the entire bakery. Then I left. The cold air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. The lights from the front porch flickered slightly, casting long shadows down the driveway where my car sat waiting like a lifeline. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement as I made my way toward it, each step firmer than the last. My fingers trembled as I opened the door, not from fear, but from the cold finality of what had just happened. Inside the car, I sat in silence for a moment. My breathing was shallow. I reached for the steering wheel, gripping it tightly. My pulse was wild. My thoughts louder than the classical music humming faintly from the stereo. They think they can take everything. They think I won't fight back. I started the engine. They were wrong. I didn't go straight home after leaving the house. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the neon-lit streets of Seattle, passing coffee shops and late-night restaurants I once loved but hadn't visited in years. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, flashing with messages from my mother, some soft, others sharp. Let's talk. Followed quickly by, don't be ridiculous, Isabelle. Then came the, you're overreacting. Followed by a voice message from Eliza dripping with faux concern. I didn't play it. I didn't need to. I knew the script. It always started with guilt and ended with blame. I pulled over by the lake, cut the engine, and sat in silence, the city humming in the distance. For the first time in years, my hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from fury. Cold, sharp-edged fury. I pulled out my laptop from the back seat, yes, I kept it with me, always, and flipped it open. The screen glowed against my face as I launched the encrypted Excel sheet I'd maintained for years. Originally, it started as a harmless way to track family-related expenses. Little things. Gas money when I drove them to appointments, last-minute grocery runs during holidays, the occasional emergency fund I offered without question. But as the years wore on and the favors became demands, I had turned it into something more. It was no longer just a budget tracker. It was a record. A timeline. A ledger of lies. The tabs were color-coded, Julian in blue, Eliza in pink, parents in dull gray. Each transaction came with a date, a description, and a screenshot of the receipt or transfer. I scrolled through them slowly, watching the amounts stack like bricks on my chest. $1,800, Julian's, last chance, tuition deposit at Greystone University. $9,200, Eliza's car lease co-signed under my name. $3,450, emergency roof repair when Dad called me crying at 2 a.m. after a storm flooded the attic. $28,000, the most egregious, down payment for Eliza's apartment. Just a small loan. That was never mentioned again. The final total sat in the bottom right corner, bolded in red. $512,884.26. I stared at the number like it was a living thing. It stared back. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I had proof. I closed the laptop, breathing slowly. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I would rage and retreat, like always. But I was done playing the disposable daughter. If they wanted to treat this like a business transaction, so be it. I was a CFO. I knew exactly how to audit an operation and burn it to the ground. The next morning, I woke up early and dressed like I was heading into war. Black blazer, sharp trousers, hair pulled tight. I stepped into my office, coffee in hand, and locked the door behind me. Then I began. I wrote the first email to my family, calm, formal, and legally phrased. Subject: formal request for financial reconciliation. Dear family, following last night's dinner and your collective decision to remove me from the family trust, I am initiating a formal audit of all financial contributions I've made to each of you over the past 12 years. As a courtesy, I've attached a preliminary report outlining these contributions, supported by receipts, bank statements, and screenshots. You will have 7 days to review and propose a repayment plan. If no resolution is reached by then, I will proceed with legal action under Washington State's civil fraud and unjust enrichment statutes. Best. Isabelle Tran. I attached a PDF copy of my ledger, excluding a few damning items I would save for court leverage, and hit send. Within 5 minutes, Julian called. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, voice high and incredulous. "It's an invoice," I said simply. "You're insane. This is what you're doing now. Suing your own family? I'm collecting a debt. You're a bitch, you know that? And you're a beneficiary of fraud," I replied. "So if I were you, I'd save the insults for someone who doesn't have screenshots of your Venmo history and 3 separate emails where you promised to pay me back by spring." He hung up. One down. The next call came from Eliza. She tried to play it cool. "Look, I get that you're upset, but like suing people? That's low. Not as low as listing me as a co-signer on your credit card and then defaulting," I said. "I'm sending your agency the documents today. Let's see how many brand sponsorships you keep after they find out you committed financial fraud." She screamed something unintelligible and hung up. 2 down. My mother didn't call. Instead, she replied to the email with a single line. "We will not be bullied," I replied instantly. "Then you'll be subpoenaed." And so it began. By the end of the week, I had looped in my lawyer, Myra Leong, a Harvard-trained woman with a reputation for annihilating people like my family in court. She was efficient, cold, and brilliant. After our first meeting, she leaned across the conference table and asked, "Do you want to settle, or do you want blood?" "Both," I said. We filed the lawsuit the next day. Within 72 hours, my mother called, not to apologize, but to threaten. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said. "You did that when you sold me out like a stock option. Do you really want this to go public?" "I do. In fact, I've already scheduled a meeting with a financial columnist from the Herald. They're interested in stories about financial abuse within families. Yours has layers." She hung up. I expected silence. What I didn't expect was retaliation. 3 days later, I came home to find a large black X spray painted across my garage door. My security camera captured Julian's car in the driveway at 3:14 a.m., headlights off. He didn't even try to hide. I called the police. Again. The officer who arrived was young, polite, and visibly uncomfortable when I showed him the footage. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I stared at the screen, at my brother's smug face. "Of course," I said. "And I want a restraining order." By now, the media had caught on. The Seattle Weekly ran a headline. "CFO files lawsuit against her own family for financial abuse, a new kind of betrayal." I didn't even flinch when I saw it. Instead, I posted the link on my LinkedIn profile with a caption. "Sometimes family isn't about love. It's about leverage. And I'm done being leveraged." Over the next week, I received hundreds of messages. Some supportive. Some shocked. Some from people who had been in my shoes, used, discarded, blamed. My inbox became a confessional booth for survivors of silent exploitation. One woman wrote, "I paid my parents' rent for 10 years. When I lost my job, they kicked me out." Another shared, "My brother borrowed $80,000. My parents said I was selfish for asking for it back." I wasn't alone. That gave me fuel. That gave me purpose. And most of all, it gave me power. A week later, my family's lawyer reached out. "Your mother is open to settling," he said. "She's offering $150,000. I almost laughed. Double it. And I wanted in writing that they retract every public accusation of ungratefulness they've made about me. I'll talk to them. You do that." The final settlement came in at $224,000. I didn't smile when I signed the papers. I didn't toast champagne. I transferred the funds into a savings account labeled Freedom. Then I bought a ticket to Lisbon. And I left. I was in Lisbon when it started. The city was a blur of terracotta rooftops and golden light, the scent of coffee and fresh bread trailing through the air as I sat by the window of a small cafe near the Alfama district. I had just taken the first peaceful breath in weeks when my phone buzzed with a notification that felt heavier than the device itself. "You might want to check Twitter," Myra had texted. I opened the app and immediately saw it, a tweet from an account I didn't recognize, but clearly backed by a network of people I knew too well. The tweet had over 40,000 views and was spreading fast. "Imagine suing your own parents after they raised you. Greed knows no limits. Hashtag family betrayal, hashtag entitled daughter." The thread underneath was filled with images, doctored screenshots, emotionally manipulative quotes, And worst of all, a video of my mother tearfully recounting how I had abandoned them in their old age and left them with nothing. She sat on the edge of the couch in what used to be my childhood living room, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, saying, "She used to be such a sweet girl. We never expected this. We just wanted fairness." I didn't even flinch. Myra was right. They were going to play the only card left, public shame. They couldn't win in court, so they went for the court of public opinion. The comments were a war zone. Some users went for my throat. "She's disgusting. No wonder she's single. Parents sacrifice everything and this is what they get. Bet she'll die rich and alone." Others defended me with passion. "Do y'all even know the full story? Maybe they abused her financially. She owes them nothing. Just because someone gave birth to you doesn't mean they own you forever. She paid their bills for 10 years. Let her live." I closed the app. Not because it hurt. I was long past the point of bleeding, but because I needed to calculate. Every attack was a move. And now it was my turn. I didn't cry. I didn't hide. I booked a small co-working space in the heart of Lisbon, brought out my laptop, and wrote a post that would end it all. Not just for them, but for everyone like them. I posted it on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and pinned it on all three. The Truth Behind My Family Betrayal. By Isabelle Tran. I didn't want to do this. But after days of watching the internet twist my story into a cheap soap opera, I have to speak. I was born into a family where love came with invoices. Over the past 12 years, I paid over $500,000 to cover my parents' mortgage, my siblings' tuition, their lifestyle, their cars, their debts. I never asked for recognition. I asked for respect. When they wrote me out of the will, I didn't scream, I simply asked for repayment. When they refused, I sued. Not out of pettiness. Out of principle. Now they're calling me heartless. Now they want the world to believe I abandoned them. Here's the truth, I was never their daughter. I was their ATM. And when I stopped dispensing, they broke down like addicts denied their fix. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it for the people who've been told. You owe us. By those who gave nothing but expectations. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone your success. And walking away from toxicity, yes, even from your family, is not betrayal. It's self-preservation. Say what you want about me. But I will not apologize for choosing myself. Within 6 hours, the post had 200,000 shares. By the next morning, it had become a headline on multiple news outlets. CFO goes viral after exposing financial abuse by her own family. Hashtag ATM child. Internet rallies behind woman sued by her own bloodline. Isabelle Tran shatters the silence on familial financial exploitation. My inbox exploded. Requests from podcasts, interviews, even a book agent. But what stunned me most were the private messages. Hundreds, then thousands of strangers, most anonymous, sharing their pain, their stories of being the oldest daughter, the successful sibling, the responsible one, everyone leans on until they break. One message read, "You gave us a voice. Thank you." I sat on my balcony in Lisbon that night, watching the sun dip into the horizon, wine glass in hand. I had never felt more seen, more heard, more alive. For once, the narrative wasn't theirs. And yet I knew they wouldn't stop. 3 days later, I got an email from my mother's new lawyer. A cease and desist. They were now claiming defamation. Eliza had apparently lost a brand deal, and Julian had been publicly humiliated. My response was short. Truth is not defamation. My documentation stands. All future communication must go through legal counsel. They tried once more. They leaked childhood photos of me, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, vacations I had paid for, to paint the image of a happy family. It backfired. The internet saw right through it. The comments were brutal. You abuse her financially and now you want credit for giving her cake once a year? Those gifts were probably bought with her money anyway. You created your villain. She didn't become one. By the end of the month, they were silent again. No more public statements. No more lawyers. No more tweets. Just silence. But silence, for once, felt like a victory. I used the settlement to fund a nonprofit initiative, The First Line, a legal aid program for individuals, especially women, suffering from financial abuse within families. It launched quietly but picked up traction quickly. People donated. Volunteers reached out. Even corporate sponsors stepped in. I had turned my pain into purpose. 6 months after the lawsuit, I got a message from Eliza. You won. Are you happy now? I didn't reply. I simply archived the message and returned to what I was doing, standing on stage at a panel in Amsterdam, speaking to a packed room of professionals about personal boundaries, resilience, and the hidden epidemic of financial codependency in families. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was just free. It was in the quiet, after the war had ended, that I began to understand the weight I had carried for most of my life. There were no more press calls, no cease and desist letters, no family voicemails vibrating with rage or guilt. The storm had passed, and in its wake, there was stillness, not the hollow kind, but the kind that gently wraps around your shoulders like a warm shawl. I had left Seattle behind with only a carry-on and a passport, intending to stay in Lisbon for a few weeks to breathe. But weeks turned into months, and then I stopped counting. I rented a small apartment on the edge of Alfama, up a winding stone alley where cats slept in windowsills and old women hung laundry from ornate iron balconies. The building was old, the floors creaked, and the hot water was inconsistent, but for the first time in years it was mine. Entirely mine. No one else's name on the lease. No one else's voice in my head. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., not to a packed calendar or crisis emails, but to the scent of baking bread and the distant clang of church bells. I walked everywhere, rediscovering the muscles in my legs, the rhythm in my steps. My laptop stayed closed most mornings. My phone spent more time on silent than active. At first, the space felt strange. I had spent so long being responsible, reactive, indispensable. Without the weight of obligation, I floated, directionless, then slowly, deliberately, towards something resembling peace. I took a photography class at a local art center, something I'd wanted to do for a decade but had always pushed to. Someday. The camera felt foreign in my hands, but liberating. I didn't need to be good, I just needed to see. It was during one of these weekend outings, wandering through the Feira de Ladra flea market with my Nikon dangling from my neck, that I met him. Look! I was crouching to photograph a rusted set of keys tangled in a leather strap when a voice behind me said, "You know those belong to a prison in Porto?" I looked up, and there he was, tall, tousled hair, soft French accent, a linen shirt slightly too wrinkled to be intentional. He had the kind of eyes that didn't ask for anything. Just observed calmly, with no agenda. "Really?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled, a small shrug. "No idea. But it makes the photo more interesting, doesn't it?" We ended up walking through the market together, talking about photography, the absurdity of tourist prices, and the hidden corners of the city. He was a travel photographer, freelance, spontaneous, always moving. At first, I thought he was the type who floated through life without responsibility. But I was wrong. He had roots. They just weren't tangled in guilt or generational debt. He was light, not because he was careless, but because he had learned to let go. We started meeting every Saturday. Then Tuesdays. Then Sundays turned into late-night rooftop wine and weekday dinners. He never asked about my past, never poked into the lawsuit, the headlines, the family saga that had followed me like a bad scent. He just saw me, as I was in that moment. A woman with tired eyes but steady hands. A woman still learning how to live for herself. One night I told him everything. We were sitting on the roof of my apartment, the city below us like a velvet quilt speckled with gold. I had a glass of Vinho Verde in my hand and the courage that came with knowing I had nothing left to prove. "I sued my family," I said. Luke didn't flinch. He waited. "They used me. For over a decade. I paid for everything, mortgages, tuition, cars, vacations. They thanked me by cutting me out of the will. When I asked for repayment, they turned it into a war. I fought back. Publicly. Legally. I won. But it cost me everything I thought I needed." He was silent for a moment, then said, "And what did you actually need?" I thought about it. "Freedom. Space. Someone who sees me without calculating what I'm worth." He didn't say anything poetic. He didn't say anything at all. He just reached over and gently touched my hand, grounding me. And in that moment I knew, he didn't need my money, my reputation, my status. He just wanted the woman sitting beside him. As months passed, I began rebuilding, not a life of obligation, but a life of intention. I kept the nonprofit, the first line, and began consulting remotely for women in similar positions. I hosted small workshops, held financial literacy sessions, and spoke on panels about family-induced financial trauma. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a resource. I didn't follow news about my family, but it found its way to me sometimes, through acquaintances, old coworkers, LinkedIn updates I forgot to mute. My father had taken a job as a warehouse supervisor. My mother was selling real estate in a suburb far from Bellevue. Julian had shut down another startup, this time after investors pulled out when they saw the lawsuit history. Eliza was still chasing her influencer dream, but sponsorships were harder to come by now. I didn't feel joy at their misfortune. But I didn't feel guilt either. I had given them 1,000 chances. They burned every one. A year after I met Luke, we took a trip to Provence, where he grew up. We stayed in his grandmother's cottage, surrounded by lavender fields and the smell of rosemary in the sun. One afternoon, while we sat in silence watching the light shift through the leaves, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back? To Seattle?" I asked. "To them." I considered it. "No," I said. "Not because I hate them. Because I don't want to keep returning to a burning building just to prove I can survive the smoke." He nodded, understanding without needing details. Later that night, as we walked through a narrow stone path under a canopy of vines, he said something that stayed with me. "You're not hard, you know. You're not cold. You're just unbreakable now. And that's beautiful." It was the first time in my life someone called my strength beautiful, not intimidating, not selfish, not aggressive. Just beautiful. Back in Lisbon, I turned 37 under a sky filled with paper lanterns and the voices of strangers who had become friends. No cake. No candles. Just good food, laughter, and a man beside me who saw my scars as proof I'd made it out alive. I once thought being cut out of the will was the worst thing that could happen. But I see now, it was a beginning, not an end. They disinherited me. So I inherited myself. And that, more than anything they could have left me, is the legacy I choose to live with. There are stories we hear that linger in the background of our minds like cautionary tales, shadows of what might happen to someone else, somewhere else. Then there are stories like Isabelle Tran's, stories that grip your spine and refuse to let go because they remind you that sometimes, the people who raise you are also the ones who will drain you. Isabelle's story was more than a viral tale of legal revenge against an ungrateful family. It was a powerful, unflinching dissection of what it means to reclaim your voice after years of silent sacrifice. And in the echo of that story, we find more than entertainment. We find lessons, painful, vital, unforgettable lessons about boundaries, love, self-worth, and the courage to walk away from people you once thought would never hurt you. The first lesson her story teaches is this: obligation is not love. Many of us are raised with the belief that family comes before all else. It's a beautiful sentiment, but dangerously simplistic. Because family, like any other relationship, must be reciprocal. Isabelle spent over a decade pouring her money, time, and emotional labor into her family, believing that loyalty meant sacrifice. But what she eventually realized is that love that is conditional on what you can give is not love at all. It's a transaction. And when those transactions become one-sided, when you are the only one giving while the others take endlessly and unapologetically, it becomes a form of exploitation wrapped in the disguise of familial duty. This recognition isn't easy. It means confronting the possibility that the people you love may not love you in return, or at least, not in the way you need to be loved. But it is necessary. Because clinging to obligation for the sake of appearance or tradition slowly erodes your sense of self. Isabelle learned to sever the rope tied around her neck, not because she stopped caring, but because she realized she had been taught to confuse guilt with love. The second, more sobering truth is that you can be the provider and still be disposable. This is perhaps the hardest pill to swallow. In many families, there's often one person, the dependable one, the successful one, the rock, who becomes the silent pillar holding everyone else together. Isabelle was that person. She thought her contributions would earn her a seat at the table, a voice in family decisions, maybe even gratitude. But when the will was rewritten, she found out how little her sacrifices meant when they no longer served others. The lesson here is brutal but liberating. Your worth in someone's life should not be measured by how much you give them. If people only value you when you are useful, then you were never loved, you were leveraged. Isabelle's ability to walk away came from the moment she accepted this truth and stopped begging for acknowledgement from those who had already made their priorities clear. The third lesson is about boundaries, and the dangerous myth that setting them makes you selfish. Isabelle was accused of being cold, petty, heartless. These are common weapons used against people who begin to draw lines where others used to take freely. But boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. They don't shut people out, they simply ask for consent before entry. Isabelle's decision to stop financing her family was not an act of revenge, it was an act of survival. She was not trying to destroy them, she was trying to save herself. This lesson speaks to a broader cultural misunderstanding. We often glorify the martyr and vilify the survivor. The one who gives until they collapse is seen as noble, the one who says, enough, is seen as cruel. But boundaries are the birthplace of self-respect. They are the only way to protect your energy, your resources, and your peace. If someone becomes angry when you set a boundary, it's because that boundary exposes how comfortable they were with taking advantage of you. A fourth, more nuanced lesson emerges in how Isabelle chose to respond, not with violence or petty retaliation, but with precision, professionalism, and truth. There is a unique kind of power in keeping receipts. Isabelle's methodical documentation of her contributions, the spreadsheets, the receipts, the emails, was not obsessive. It was self-defense in a world where gaslighting runs rampant. In families, especially toxic ones, memory becomes a weapon. People forget your sacrifices the moment they're inconvenient. By keeping evidence, Isabelle reclaimed the narrative. She didn't just prove her point, she dismantled theirs. The lesson here is not about being paranoid, but about recognizing that in environments where fairness is not a given, transparency is your only shield. Whether in personal relationships or professional ones, having a record of what you gave, what you endured, and what you agreed to is not just smart, it's essential. Equally powerful was her refusal to let the courtroom be the final battleground. When her family launched their attack on social media, painting her as a villain, Isabelle chose the path of full exposure. She didn't hide. She wrote publicly, clearly, and unapologetically. And that brings us to another critical lesson. Telling your story is not betrayal, it is liberation. We live in a culture that pressures people, especially women, to keep it in the family. Don't air dirty laundry. Don't make a scene. Don't make others uncomfortable. But silence is how abuse thrives. Silence is how cycles repeat. Isabelle's choice to speak, to post, to expose her truth without flinching, was a declaration that the shame did not belong to her. And in doing so, she gave others permission to speak too. Her story became a mirror for thousands who had been similarly used, and her voice became a torch in a dark room where others had been fumbling alone. The truth may not heal every wound, but it shines a light on who caused them, and that is the first step toward accountability. There's also a lesson in what Isabelle did not do. She didn't beg for reconciliation. She didn't wait for an apology that would never come. She chose peace over closure. That is perhaps the most radical act of all. We are trained to believe that resolution must come from others, that the story can't end until they say, "I'm sorry," or until they finally understand how much they hurt you. But some stories don't end that way. Some people will never see your side. Some families will never admit their wrongs. And waiting for that moment is like waiting for a train that was never scheduled. Isabelle's peace came not from fixing her family, but from freeing herself from the fantasy that they would ever be what she needed. She didn't heal by returning to them, she healed by returning to herself. The final and most tender lesson is perhaps the simplest. You are allowed to build a new life, and a new family. Isabelle didn't just walk away from her old life, she walked towards something better. In Lisbon, she created space for joy, for love, for curiosity. She met Luke, not because she was searching for someone to fill the hole her family left, but because she had finally cleared the rubble and made room for someone who saw her clearly. She pursued photography, not because it made money, but because it made her feel. She lived without apology, without guilt, without the invisible leash of should. And that is the true reward of letting go, not bitterness, not loneliness, but freedom. A freedom to exist fully, to love gently, and to choose your tribe not by blood but by truth. So what can we learn from Isabelle's story truly? That love without respect is poison. That giving without receiving is slow erosion. That silence in the face of exploitation is not strength, it is complicity. That it is not ungrateful to say, "You hurt me, and I will not let you do it again." That sometimes, the most generous thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and close the door gently behind you. We are taught to fear estrangement. But estrangement, in the right context, is not a curse. It is a boundary finally honored. It is the refusal to fund your own destruction. It is the first step toward a life that belongs to you again. Isabelle's journey was not just a fall from grace, it was a climb out of captivity. And for anyone who has ever been the good daughter, the strong one, the dependable giver who was never allowed to be weak, her story is a reminder: you are allowed to stop giving. You are allowed to ask for more. You are allowed to walk away. And most importantly, you are allowed to be free.